Today's exercise will cover the following topic: AWS Lambda function basics, writing Lambda function event handler and testing it locally, deploying the function and, providing we have time, enabling Lambda read operations for the S3 bucket that stores the quiz data. Something will still be unfinished about our Lambda function, namely allowing the Lambda to write and to read from elastic cache. For the last time, fingers crossed, we get back to the backend code, but we will not run ahead. Now that I have S3 bucket configured and populated with both quiz data and static website file, I need the next resource to provide. I need to decide what the resource is, and let me check what resources do I need to complete my website. And these resources are Elastic Cache Redis, API Gateway, and AWS Lambda. Probably I will start with Lambda, but before starting with Lambda, I should decide what is inside this Lambda function. And the Lambda function use case decides on the content and the implementation of the function. So I would go and check how my API gateway would communicate with AWS Lambda. Now I just want to take a look at API gateway here. I want to create one and explore it a bit. Let's say I'm building it from scratch. It would be HTTP API. I don't need WebSocket because our website is fine without WebSockets, and all the data we need from the server we would get from AJAX requests. Now, I need the integration. And let's see what option do I have. The integration type is Lambda. The region is Union Central -1. And I need the Lambda function. Okay, if I need this Lambda function, let me Google a bit how would my Lambda function, how would it be integrated with API Gateway and what interface it should provide. I'm gonna Google an answer on the official website of AWS, but let it be a more specific request that AWS Python Lambda API Gateway example. I believe it will lead me here to amazon.com, and soon I'll expect some Python code here on the page. And yes, here it is. The main concept, I am having one handler here, and this handler would receive the event and the context. And let's see what's inside the event. Probably is just a Python dictionary. And the key of the event is the operation, but again, the structure of this data, the actual content is defined by me, by us, who developed the requirements, who specify the requirements for the API. And judging on the operation, we are performing one of these small inline functions. In our case, the API is different. The API looks this way. It's fast API, and there are a number of endpoints, and each endpoint has its unique route, and this route corresponds to the rules, to the agreements on the REST API basic concepts. So we need numerous routes, but ideally, I don't want to have all these routes in my API gateway, because configuring routes, adding more endpoints to API gateway is something I want to avoid. Instead, probably I would implement kind of command pattern, and here I will get rid of all these endpoints and instead implement something like this. Something like this handler receiving the event, and the event there is all the data, the operation and the payload. And the response, again, I would go to the quiz manager, process the request, and return JSON or dictionary to the user. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna get rid of this API completely, because I need it at least for my local tests. So uh, pay attention to this particular error. I made this mistake, not an error, but probably just a bit of slip of mind when I was creating this main.py. I even placed it outside the src folder. So it looks like it does not belong to the project at all. But that's okay, because for our Lambda function, we'll be deploying this src folder in sources, probably in a packet file, but we'll be missing this main.py on the server side. We don't need this in our Lambda. They don't need this fast API application. And if someone is unhappy about us allowing any origin for our web server and potentially exposing ourselves to cross-origin requests, source and exploitation, but again, that's not a problem if we go to Lambda, because we don't have this API in Lambda Fast API. Instead, we'll implement something like this, simple handler. And let's create a Python model with this handler. This would be an entry point for our Lambda function. I hope, at least I hope, that the rest of the code we could reuse. Now I'm introducing one more Python model here, but probably as well I'll create a package, because this model kinda does not belong to any of these packages. And let the model be quiz API, no, just Lambda or Lambdas in case we'll need more in future. Package is Lambdas, and inside there is quiz API Lambda. And now this Lambda would resemble this, not this, but this particular model with all the endpoints, but a bit simpler in a way. As I always do, I will start from copy pasting the code and gradually reshaping this. So I'll be having the same functions, but I don't need roots any longer. Instead, I will have simple and synchronous functions. Our Lambda is synchronous. I believe asynchronous function support for AWS Lambda is not implemented yet in Python libraries. That's why the function is synchronous. But again, inside the function, there is nothing asynchronous so far. So the transition is easy. And let's implement for now a couple requests, one get and one post request, and the entry point. The entry point is similar to what we see here, but I'd like to have type definitions, type annotations, because I love type annotations. Don't know, maybe it's a Lambda handler to be a bit more specific. Okay, this event, according to the example, is just a dictionary where the string, as always, is a type of the key and the value is just anything. So this annotation will do for me. And the return value, I believe the return value is again the same type of the dictionary. And I use my knowledge, I use my experience that I have, and my knowledge tells me that this event will contain the body, the headers, and tons of data I could potentially use. But actually I need the body only. So I will extract this event data from the JSON of our event body variable. So let's see, it would probably be event body. And also I need this operation. Or maybe I'll be a bit more specific again, and I will call it requested operation. Let us raise some exception with the meaningful response. I believe it will help us while debugging the Lambda. Let's say that the payload does not contain, or it should contain, this requested operation field. That's it. But now, judging on this requested operation, we want to call one of these functions. And I believe the best way is to create a dictionary where the operation is the key and the function is the value. I'm creating this dictionary. This is simple. And let me call it function by requested operation, or maybe a bit simpler by request. And this dictionary will contain a couple entries. Later on, we'll add more, but for now, this is get topics function for the same operation name. Or maybe I'll reuse this. Let me check. My API implementation endpoints are here. So presently, in our JavaScript file that communicates with the server, I already defined some endpoints. Let me check these endpoints in the server.js. And the endpoints we see quiz start, quiz schedule, etc. To simplify the transition from this server.js file to the new one that supports Lambda API or API gateway and the Lambda backend behind it, I will rename the requested operation and let it be quiz topics. This one would be quiz start. Here comes the function. Now that I have the function by request, I will call it here. But again, the problem is the function signature of the function should be the same for these two functions. The return value for the functions is the same, but the argument is different. The first function does not take any argument at all, but the second does. So let it be just a dictionary, because here in the event data we have only the dictionary. We don't have a class, we don't have an object of the class deserialized from the Python dictionary. So let us define this argument this way. I will call it request data. And the type of the request data is dictionary. But as I am not using this argument, I will add this underscore prefix. But here actually I use the argument. And the problem is now my manager class expects some specific object for this quiz start request. This is the type of the argument, and I'm getting instead this dictionary, untyped object. But that's easy to fix because we use pydantic data class JSON. And I'll be using this simple parson method. This method from dict will do the trick, and the body of this function, it didn't get changed almost. So I'll reuse it here. And I will call the function. First, I will name it processor because it actually processes my request. Now I will provide the function with the requested operation. Okay, the event data requested operation is the key to the function dictionary. But again, the problem is the payload might contain an operation that's not supported, and my next step would be to implement an extra check here. This check is super simple. I know what the request operation is, and if it's not in the keys of this dictionary, function by request, I will raise a separate exception. And I would say that the requested operation value is incorrect, and I would name the correct options. Okay, what are the correct options? Probably I'll just join the keys here, function by request, and yes, I will join them separated by comma and an extra space. Okay, something does not look right, but why? Sorry, I'm missing this join function. And now that all my brackets are in place, this exception looks good. I'm safe here, and I know that this function by request exists by this provided key. So I will call the processor. But actually now I need the data, the actual payload for this requested operation. The data might not present in this dictionary because let's see, this particular function does not require any data at all. This means we'll be using get, but not square brackets operator. Because if we are missing the value completely, that's okay for a get request. And let me call the actual payload field payload. Now I'm storing this response. This would be response data. And I will return again as I am getting the data, including the body, including the headers and some extra stuff. I'll also be returning not just this dictionary containing all the response data, but also the status of the requested operation. I need the status code, and I need the body. And the body, I'm not sure, it might be a dictionary or it might be a string actually. And now I'm not so sure that this code will work. This code might be okay for a specific type of Lambda, but the actual format of the input and the output might be different as well. So I'm going to check, I'm going to Google this and probably adjust the arguments type. There are two types of API gateway integration with Lambda function, and these types are proxy and non-proxy. In one case, for non-proxy integration, we'll get this data as a simple dictionary, and we don't have to return these kind of data, status code, body, and some extra payload. Instead, we'll return only the dictionary containing the response that we get from this processor. But for a non-proxy integration, the API gateway will push all the data, all the headers, all extra stuff here in the Lambda handler, and we'll expect the full response in this return operator. So we should decide which way we go, with API gateway integration proxy or non-proxy, And in order to decide which suits our needs better, we'll go and Google as we did before. And now the question is AWS API integration, a gateway integration, proxy versus non-proxy. And there is an article in AWS on the Amazon website that will help us decide which way is easier to implement. And let's see. The Lambda proxy integration supports a streamlined integration setup. This setup is simple and can evolve with the backend without having to tear down the existing setup. So if you want to extend our Lambda with new methods or redefine the existing ones, probably the better option to take is this proxy integration. But in contrast, the custom integration allows reusing of configured mapping templates for various integration endpoints. This setup is more involved and it's recommended for more advanced application scenarios. So for me, the answer is clear. I'm opting for the non-proxy integration way. And this means the request will contain all the data, including the headers that I probably don't need, and the response should also contain, say, the status code. But the only question is left, and the question is, will the event contain the dictionary or will it be a plain string that I should parse in before actually passing this data to my handling functions? Now I'll check the documentation again to find out what the response and request data formats for the API Gateway proxy integration for AWS Lambda. And again, using the search string, this is something simple, AWS Gateway proxy integration event data. Let's see. Not sure, maybe this article will show us the actual event format. I hope to find out what the input format is, payload format version. The payload format is what we have here, is a version, root key, row path, but I will probably have the single path for all the requests to our API gateway integration Lambda function, and the path will be something like API quiz, or just API. I will have headers, and most important, no, that's not in the context. That's body. And I see the body is just a string. And what's in the response? Okay, the response is status code, headers, multi-value headers. I'm not sure what it is. And the body is probably just a string. So I have to parse the string request to something that I can deal with. And this would be a dictionary. I just have to parse the dictionary. Here, the event data body, I should convert it from the string to dictionary this way. I believe JSON library will do the job for me. Load string, event body. I have to import this module. Done. So this is dictionary, but the return value should be a string. And the opposite of the load string is a dump string, dump s, the response data. Now, before actually deploying this Lambda function, I'm going to check how it works. And for this, I will probably run this code directly in the model. What I'm doing now, I'm creating a main function or main entry point to be able to call to run to debug this code right from my IDE, or maybe from the command line, but IDE is definitely the more convenient option. I'm gonna execute my Lambda handler with some predefined payload. And this payload body will be, actually I need the requested operation. So I need a string, but I'll construct first an object, a dictionary. And in this dictionary, I will provide the requested operation. And for simplicity, it will be get topics. This is the key, quiz topics. Yes, this is it. Now I want to print the result and see if it works. But it's trivial, it should work. I don't expect anything. Oh, something is missing. My context, I'm not sure if I need it. Let me make it nullable for now. And remove unused imports. Because we have too many requests here, but we actually use just one. Oh yeah, let me leave it. Okay, I'm gonna test the function. And the handler returned us the quiz topics as we expected. But let's check something different, and this would be our second request, quiz start operation. And for the quiz start operation, we need the payload. And the payload is again a dictionary. Let me check what this dictionary could be. Quiz start request. I need this quiz start request. I can construct one and serialize it, or I can simply provide these values. The topic ID, it's something. Let me pick the topic ID from our storage and our quiz data JSON file. It's here. Now the username. And finally the question seconds, but this is optional field. Probably I will be fine without specifying the delay second. It will be defaulted. Quiz status code is not JSON serializable. Now I caught one error. I caught one error that might be troubling me in future. That's good. That's fine to have this error now, not later. And if I check this, I'm returning, in this case, list of dictionary, in this case, dictionary. But actually what I have to return is just the string, because the string is something I'm providing in the response data. So here comes the problem. Probably I will convert my result to string right here, because this class, for instance, the start quiz return value is user quiz state, and the user quiz state, I know how to convert it to the string. And if I change my return value to the string here, I will just replace this to dict to JSON. I believe that's it, to JSON. And my return value, I don't have to JSON dump it any longer. I will use it as it is, because it should always be a string, except for the first method. Somehow I should to return a string from here, but again, that's simple. and I will use my JSON dump string function I used before to convert the dictionary to a string, and the return value is a string now. Okay, looks good. I hope that now I'll be fine. Yes, I have the answer, and the answer looks okay. What I'm gonna do now, I will implement all the missing methods or missing functions, but again, this is a trivial stuff. For 5 more minutes, maybe 10 minutes, I'll be just removing these comments from the method definition, function definition, oh, removing the extra decorator, asynchronous return type specification, and now the return type is string. So response to JSON. And what else? I have to change this format here. And the input value for the quiz manager object join quiz function method. This is from dict. Okay. The same for the next one. No, to JSON. Again, return value. It's just a tedious routine job, but luckily I don't have too many requests. Get quiz state. We're almost done. No, this does not belong here. It's not async any longer. Two more functions. And there is only one left. Actually, this is an integer. And what will happen if I provide just an integer value here? So let's say my body is integer, my request body is integer, and it will look like this. Let me check it in the Python console. Request data. Let's call it data. And in the data, there is requested operation. It would be just op. And the body. And the body is a string. What happens if I parse the string body or the whole operation, not the body specifically, but the whole data with JSON package? JSON load string data. Again, I'm going to convert this data to the data string. Data string equals JSON dump string. No, data. Okay, it looks normal. Now what if I parse it back? Data string. I will parse load string by the same very library. Okay. Will it work for me if I don't change this code? If I just leave this code as it is, get quiz results with the quiz code, might be, not so sure. Ideally, we need an integer, but that again depends how we define our data. For instance, if our data is not exactly operation and the body that's string, but instead operation and the body that's integer. I'm not sure how to provide this data on the client side, but we'll see. Now the data string is a bit different. There is already an integer, and of course, if we load the string, there will also be an integer value for this body key. So I'm too lazy to change the format, to change the payload for the getQuizState function. No, for getQuizResult function. I will leave it as it is. The quiz code is an input argument and it's of type integer, but the result should be, again, I will return JSON dump string result. And now, yes, I should update this specification for the return value. I don't need this asynchronous modifier any longer. That's it. I only have to update this function by request dictionary. There are more functions. I will add them one by one, starting from, let's see, join quiz. I'm not sure about the actual key. I will look up the key in the API endpoint definition. But now I'm just adding the functions and the default key. The next one is get quiz state, then answer quiz, and finally get quiz results. Now I'm gonna look up the endpoint names from the quiz.py API definition. This simple quiz join, quiz schedule, etc. Everything starts with the quiz. What's next? Quiz check status, quiz answer, and quiz results. I don't need this path, including the quiz code. That's not a REST API. The key is enough. I will get the code somewhere in the payload. I hope I will be able to send the integer in the payload, but we'll see and we'll fix it if it's required. But for now, I have already the Lambda handler, and probably the next step for me is actually to configure the Lambda publishing in AWS. And this part will be a bit more tricky than what we have so far, than the actual implementation, because now we're going to go back to the Terraform. Basically, there are two types of Lambda deployment, and the first type is the preferred one in my case because it's simpler and probably it costs less in operation. And this is package file Lambda deployment. I will pack my Lambda files, my source files from the Lambda in a zip archive, and I will upload this archive to AWS and I will create a Lambda function out of these packed files. The second option is a bit different. It probably is a preferable one when my project environment is more complex and I have to deploy it as a whole. And I'll opt in this case for the second option of delivering my Lambda as a Docker image. But again, for the simplicity in the scope of this training video course, I'll be using packet Lambda deployment way. And again, this way of deploying the Lambda is a preferable one in most cases. If we take a look at the project, there are multiple files. And there are files in SRC folder. I will probably copy and paste all the files. And in the Lambda itself, I will specify the path to my Lambda function and the name of the handler. This is the name of the handler. And this would be the path, and the path would be relative. But my code requires dependencies, and dependencies live here in when folder. So the folder is quite big. Not so sure what I'm gonna check. It's probably library and site packages. And here I have fast API that I don't need any longer, but still HTTPX that I'm using for my integration tests. Probably I don't need it either, but I have these Redis that I need. I have more packages, more dependencies, and some of the dependencies at least I would take inside my Lambda project. So somehow I want to decide how to take these files to the server and how to place these files on the server. And again, as I did before, I'll check for the specific recipe in the internet. The question is, what files do I need to include in my zip AWS Lambda source in Python? Okay, let's try the first link. The zip file contains your functions code. Yeah, that's okay. And any dependencies used to run your function code on Lambda. That's fair. Let's check this specific example for just one function, one module containing the Lambda handler. This is not my case. My case is not so simple. Yes, I'm using a virtual environment, and I should ship my virtual environment. And this way, the guide suggests me to install my virtual environment dependencies with pip, deactivate, and create a package including my site packages folder. Here, let's see, it's in the venv, it's lib, it's site packages, and the version of Python I use. I'm gonna do the same, and I'm gonna automate all these actions in a shell script. Let me create this shell script now. I will place it in the root folder, and I'll call it pack lambda.sh. And as for all the sh files, I will start it from bin bash. And now I want to create a new folder containing everything I need for Lambda. This folder might be called Lambda source, for instance. But I don't want to have this folder always always in my project directory. Instead, I want to create this folder only when it's needed. And later on, I gonna delete this folder and all the content. I will also add this folder to gitignore file because I don't want to have this in my code repository. This is something temporary, and I will delete this temporary data probably right after deploying the Lambda on the server, or maybe in advance. So if I have already this folder, I will delete all the folder and all its content, and this would be a recursive operation. Lambda src, I delete it, and now I'm creating this folder from scratch. It would be empty. And now I'm copying all my sources in this lambda src folder. I'm using a cp command, cp all, the src folder inside this lambda src folder. Let me try running my sh file. It's called pack. No, there is no suggestion, and I know why. The problem is I'm gonna change the mode, ch mode of my pack. No. Okay, of my pack lambda.sh, and I'm gonna add the execution mode. Now let me run it again. Yes. And let's see, lambda src is in place, and it contains all the files, including the files I don't need. But I hope they won't occupy too much space because the Lambda distribution is limited to 50 megabytes in a packet format. So if these files occupy too much space, let me check how much actually. How do I show my hidden files here? What option do I have? No, that's not big, so I will leave it. But I also need the dependencies. And now I'm going to install the dependencies or reuse the existing ones. What I need actually is this data. Let me go back. When flip site packages. And I could just copy this path. Let's say I'm copying venv dependencies. But there is one problem about copying the dependencies. Again, they might be too big, and probably I don't need this much data in my Lambda package. What I'm going to do now, I will define a separate requirements file, and in this requirements file, I will collect only the requirements I need for the quiz Lambda. And for this reason, probably I will destroy the existing virtual environment and create a new one. But before destroying, I wanna be sure that all my dependencies are already in the requirements file. And for this, I will simply execute pip freeze and reroute the output to the requirements.txt. Probably it's not changed because I did it the last time I added something to the project. But now I'm gonna delete the virtual environment and create it from scratch, but including all the requirements I need for my Lambda function. So my next action is to deactivate and remove completely this venv directory. I don't have venv, and without the dependencies, my Lambda is not working any longer. At least I believe it won't. No, because I'm referring in my running configuration to the Python binary that I don't have any longer. So I will create a new one. And I will do what I did the first time. Not exactly. Probably I will check what my Python version 3.9 is. Python pyenv which Python 3.0. Actually, let's check what options we have with Lambda. AWS Lambda Python version support. And the last news was about Python 3.9. What about Python 3.10? No, there is a request for supporting 3.10, and for now, the support for this version is still unclear. So I wanna switch to Python 3.9 and create a virtual environment for this very version 3.9. Now I'm gonna activate the environment. Again, it's venv folder, it's here. So I'm sourcing from venv bin activate. That's it, but also I want to provide this virtual environment path in my configuration. I'm not sure if it's there because let me check. Yes, this is 3.9.10. It should be something different. Let me go back to the project settings, and here project name is Quizless, interpreter version 3.10. That's not it. But again, it's called 3.10. But actually, it routes me to the proper path of the Python executable. So I don't want to change this for now. What I want to do is install the dependencies. And I know some dependencies are missing. For instance, if I check my Lambda implementation, Fast API router is missing, but actually I don't need it inside my Lambda function. The rest of the things are okay, but if I go back to the quiz manager, no, nothing is red. But if I check one of the classes, data classes JSON, I definitely miss. So I want to check pip install, but probably there is a dash, not underscore. Let me wait a bit. Now it's okay. So what if I'm run this Lambda one more time? Redis. Definitely Redis is missing. Okay, what if I retry? Pydantic. Interesting. I thought Pydantic is kinda shipped with Python, but that's not true, apparently. Now we are fine. And these dependencies, these requirements are enough for my Lambda function. And let's see how do I pack it. But before I'm gonna freeze the requirements in a separate file. Freeze, of course, pip freeze. Let's say lambda requirements.txt. Let's compare these two files. The original requirements file is of 33 lines, 33 dependencies I had initially, but now it boiled down to only 10 dependencies. This is much better for the Lambda. Now I'm gonna modify the pack lambda.sh file for not to copy the files from this packages directory, but instead to copy the files or not to copy, but to install all the required files in my ven folder. No, in my Lambda SNC folder, and inside probably the dependencies would be alongside my SRC folder. And there is an option in the pip package manager to install all the files in the specific folder, and this option is target. So I'm gonna, instead of copying, run this command install, and the target is, let's see, lambda src directly. Probably I don't need a venv subfolder inside. And also I have to provide my new requirements file because it's more simple. Lambda requirements.txt. Let's see if it works. Okay, something went wrong. Let me check pip install target. Let me be a bit more specific with the request. And target is an option I need. Oh yeah, the target switch is definitely something, yes, because it's not a single letter. Probably this will do for me. Let me check. Yeah, now it works. But that's still just a folder. And I need the zip file to send this file to AWS and to create a Lambda function out of it. So my next step would be to pack all this data and to place all this data somewhere. And this file I will create eventually, I will use in my Terraform configuration. So now I just packed these files in a separate folder, in a separate Python file. I'm not sure if I need more files in this folder, but let me define this new directory. It would be lambda output. And in the lambda output, I will have lambda.zip, so it might be already in place. In this case, I need to remove it, as well as I remove lambda src before creating and populating this directory. So remove lambda output and lambda.zip. Now that this file is removed, I will pack the content of this folder into a file in the lambda output lambda.zip. I would browse this folder, I would change my working directory, here lambda src, and use the zip command. Let it be recursive for all subdirectories. And I will store this file in the lambda output lambda.zip. But presently I'm in the lambda src folder, so I should go one directory up, and that's it. Let me check if it works. Again, back lambda.sh, and now again I'm installing all the dependencies, but then too many. So it didn't take much time, and my lambda output, is it still empty? Yeah, it says lambda output lambda.zip, no such file or directory. That's strange. I have missed something, but I cannot find out what am I missing. So yes, technically I don't expect this file to be in this lambda output directory. The name is the same. Okay. It says it cannot remove. Okay, that's fine. I will probably just ignore this error because this file might not exist, and that's totally okay for me. Let me rerun this command, pack lambda. Now, again, it says cannot remove, no such file or directory. That's weird. But might be, again, it's okay for me to have this message here. The only problem, the zip error says nothing to do. So when I'm going to the lambda rcc folder and trying to zip recursively and store the file in the lambda zip, something goes wrong. Let me print the current working directory. And see where I am when I'm trying to go inside the lambda rcc. And currently, before going inside lambda src, I'm in the HDD sources. And lambda src is, yes, it's not empty. So that's a bit of a mystery for me. Let me run this command directly in the directory lambda src cd lambda src and run the command. It says nothing to do. I should go and check, probably something's wrong with my zip command arguments. And zip bash clear arguments. What am I missing? Okay, this is for unpacking. My command is different. No, this is not it. This is a name. Ah, actually, again, I need a directory. I need the second argument for the zip. So the switch is R, recursive, and the file name follows this switch. And now there is a directory that I should read. And this directory is the current one. Let me try again. Hope now it will work. But let me also change one directory up and run the script. Now it works. And I see the lambda output contains this lambda zip. In order to be able to add this lambda output to my source code repository, I don't want to have this directory initially empty. That's why I'm going to add one file, and this would be an empty file. But having this file in the folder will prevent this folder from being hidden from my Git repository. And this file I should add to the git ignore because I don't want to commit this file. I will create this file running this peg_lambda.sh script. Finally, my next step is to go to the Terraform documentation and check what provider, definitely provider is AWS, check what resource should I use to deploy my Lambda, and how do I provide this zip file as the source code for the Lambda. So my query will be Terraform Quizless. No, this is my application. What I'm actually seeing serverless? No. Lambda function. Lambda function and zip. Probably the zip is just the default option, so I don't have to be so specific with my request. And this data I need, this resource is AWS Lambda function. Actually, it says I need also some role for my Lambda. This Lambda assumes certain role, but we'll test it later on. And now there is an option to create a zip archive and to include all the files I need in the zip archive, but I believe my shell script is a better option because it does not only pack the files, the source files, but also provides the dependencies. And the dependencies it builds from a separate, let me remind you, separate requirements file that is more concise than the default requirements file I need for running this website locally. That's why I'm gonna skip this and I'm gonna copy and paste this in the new Terraform file. And the new Terraform file is lambda.tf. Now let's start from defining this resource. It's not a test lambda, let it be quizless lambda. No, quizless. And I need the file name. And the file name, I have the file already. I assume that the user, that's me, not the user, but the developer already ran the script and has this file here. But that's not just Lambda output because I'm one directory down and I should go up one directory. And the function name is actually the name as it appears in AWS. Let it be the same. It should not be unique. So unlike my bucket name, this Lambda function name is something arbitrary and I don't have to be specific and to introduce some variable and to allow another developer who is probably forking the same repository to allow him to substitute this value easily. No, this don't have to be unique. Doesn't have to be unique, but I actually need something else I'm missing, and this is Lambda handler. And this Lambda handler is actually the path to my file that contains, to my Python model that contains the Lambda handler definition, and it's in the lambdas. And inside there is quiz API lambda.py, and inside, I believe that's annotation, should be the handler name. The handler name is lambda handler. That's it. Runtime is not Node.js but Python. Again, I'm having Python. Oh, it's called 3.10. So something might went wrong. I will recheck, but I know that Lambda function only supports Python 3.9. And the variables, environment variables, yes, I'll be providing some variables for my Lambda. Let's see in the settings, I have the path to my Redis host. And Redis host actually is not local host any longer for the Lambda function, but the port might be a default one. So for now, I will redefine Redis host here. What's the name? No, that's not the name of the environment variable. The name is Redis underscore host capitalized. And that's it. But now I see I'm gonna go back and check what Python version I use presently with virtual environment. I wonder what the Python version is. Python version is 3.10. So somewhere before that I was creating my virtual environment, I did it wrong, and I tried to create the virtual environment this way. Oh, that's interesting. When I asked pyenv which Python 3.9 is, it actually showed me Python 3.10. Okay, let me ask it a bit differently. Oh yeah, this is the command I should have used initially. So this slightly change in the spelling, this space didn't make my command crash, but it was actually worse. Instead of making my command crash, what I have now, it actually failed to provide me with the result with the virtual environment I expected. The version is wrong. And that's a pity, but that's easy to fix. How I'm gonna fix it? Again, the same way. I'll remove my version environment completely, but before I should deactivate it. And create again with the proper command. And as the virtual environment is created and it's empty now, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna reinstall all the dependencies because I don't wanna have these dependencies probably be targeted at the versions of the libraries that goes well with Python 3.10, but not so well with 3.9. So I'm gonna activate my new virtual environment and gonna install the dependencies including pydantic, install, data classes JSON, what I'm missing, Redis probably. Let me check the requirements. Not this, pydantic, Redis, data classes. And the rest of the stuff I didn't install explicitly. It was just a dependency. These all the requirements were dependencies for the packages I installed. So still, I would gonna first try if my Lambda application works, and I'll check if the virtual environment is still working for me. But let me just run this file. It works. This means Now I can freeze the Python requirements, pip freeze, to the same file that already exists, lambda requirements. Let me just rerun this spec lambda command. I hope I'm using the same Python version here, 3.9, that I specified for my virtual environment here in the root folder. But we'll see. If if it doesn't work this way, we'll adjust our deployment scenario. Now, if I go back to the Lambda definition in lambda.tf, this might be it, but again, my Lambda definitely needs at the very least access to the S3 storage. And for accessing the S3 storage, I might need special permissions or maybe special role. And this Lambda IAM role should allow my Lambda access to at least one bucket that contains the quizzes data. And this role I should assign, I already have the example here. I should assign to my Lambda and assume role policy mentions this data and this JSON file that does not exist apparently. Where do I have this AWS IAM policy document? Do I have it? Oh, yeah. Hmm. Interesting, but there is an alternative option for creating this policy and specifying this role. Let me check what policy should I provide for this Lambda and what role should I provide as well. Probably I need both. I believe I should do this before actually deploying my Lambda to the server. Because if I don't have provide the Lambda with any role, with any permission, I won't be able to test it. Because even the simplest request I have now, this request is actually get topics, requires reading access to my S3 bucket. So the next step before I deploy this Lambda is to assign a specific role for the Lambda. And let me do this and let me read this role or policy, again, role from a JSON file, because I don't want to introduce this more data definition. I want to have it simple from a file, and this file, I don't know, this is the role Lambda assumes. And definitely it's a JSON. The only problem for now, I don't have an idea what should I provide here, but I'll find out. It's just a file, JSON file. I believe I can reuse this code, but of course it should be JSON, but we already have the JSON that looks almost the same. What it was, S3 policy. So I'll start from copy pasting this policy. And the version is always the same. And the statement, yes, should be allow. Yep. I'm not sure about this statement identifier. Probably I can skip it. And the principal is different. The principal is actually our Lambda service. So probably I'll define it this way. hope it will work. And the action is this. What am I missing? I don't need this resource. I don't need the resource at all, I believe. I used all the data from the original document. I used action, principal, service type, and this would be the identifier, and the effect is allow. So I believe I'm done with this role. But that's not enough because this role per se does not allow Lambda access in S3. Probably I need a bit more. What I need now is a policy that allows Lambda access in S3. And let me just Google it as I did before many times. It's Lambda AWS Lambda policy for reading S3 bucket. And let's start from Terraform. Okay, I already have this role. It might be a bit different, but yes, this is the data I provided in the JSON for this role. Now I need the policy. Now I will copy this policy here. But I don't want to, oh, that's ugly. I don't want to have this statement for the policy inside my lambda.tf file. Instead, I'll introduce new file, and this would be lambda uh, probably underscore s3 policy. And here I copy and paste this. I hope it's already a JSON with the proper format. Again, it does not look good now because of the extra spacing I don't need. It's easy to fix. What about the logs? Not so sure, but let them be here. And now allowing actually all the actions with the S3 bucket, including probably creating objects and deleting objects. I'm not so sure my Lambda actually need all these actions enabled here. So my actions could be slightly different, and I don't need logs. And the actions I need would be definitely S3 colon, but I should be more specific here. And also I probably should be more specific with the resource. And the resource would be the bucket ID. But what policies I need? Okay, I have to check what actions do I need in my S3 bucket policy in Terraform, AWS, for reading the S3 bucket, for reading the bucket. It might be a bit too broad topic, but no, that's it. I believe I need this. And again, I need to be specific with the AIN. And as I did with this policy, S3 policy, I will provide my bucket AIN. Actually, I could have copied and pasted this, but let me now specify resources here in the array. And I will be first getting any object from here, from the bucket. and listing the bucket itself. So I need a templated file, not just a file. And I should provide bucket ARN as I did here in S3 definition. Where do I have it? Yes, this one. This is the policy I need for my Lambda function as well. Apparently, the policy file is different, but the bucket ARN argument is the same. So what is the policy file? Lambda underscore S3 policy. I will copy it to be safe. And that's probably it. Let's check. First, I have the Lambda function definition. And this Lambda function definition looks pretty okay for me. It refers to the file that exists in the Lambda output folder lambda.zip. And the function name is an arbitrary value. It's quizless lambda in my case. And the role is, oh, okay. Do I have this lambda role? No, it's called IAM for lambda. Yes, I do have this role, and I specify the handler in the lambda subfolder of the src folder, and the src folder is the default one inside the lambda.zip. I should check if it's a first level folder inside. So I'm gonna temporarily unpack it, and here, do I have src? No, I'm searching for lambdas, and here it is. I have quiz underscore API underscore lambda.py. That's okay. The source code hash. No, that's something different. The source code hash should refer to the same file. I can use MD5 function, or I can use instead the file itself. Let me see, I have MD5 already in my S3. It's a digest for any file. Yes, here MD5. Probably it will be also MD5 here. Okay. Runtime is Python 3.9. That's totally okay. And the environment variable for now, I only specify the host. Oh, now I see one more problem. My Lambda function actually should read values from S3, but instead it will look for a folder named storage on the same level as a top level src folder, but there is no src folder, and would try to take the quiz data from this subfolder. But now I feel I should try applying this configuration and deploying this Lambda and testing it. I will expect error even with the simplest request possible, with the one that lists the topics from the folder. But that's okay because we have this instruction, and each time we update the source code, ideally the Lambda code should be updated as well. So let's try to deploy this configuration. And again, I'm using Terraform apply, but from the IAC folder. But let me show you something specific to Terraform. It's TF state. And the TF state is the file I'm never gonna publish to my repository because it actually contains some data that should be protected. Let me check. I have this key and this secret that I use to authorize my actions through API. The API calls that Terraform initiates need these values. No, luckily I don't have this. Okay, but still something that I want to protect might be inside this TF state. And that's the reason I'm not source controlling these files. But if I lose my Terraform state file, my configuration will get lost. And in this case, I should delete all the resources I allocated with Terraform on the server side and then build them from scratch. If I still have this Terraform file, Terraform state file, I could adjust small minor changes on the AWS side. Let me cancel this operation. And I would refresh my TF state. But if I lost TF state completely, I would be having troubles, especially if I have too many resources allocated. So be careful about this TF state file and be careful about your gitignore file. It definitely should include this file. Even though there is no the API key I used, still is unsafe to include this file in your repository under source control. Okay, after this disclaimer, I'm gonna run my Terraform apply. Oh, something is wrong. There is a test policy. I don't have a test policy. This is a leftover from the documentation that I copied. Yeah, this is a prefix name for the environment, and I don't have this environment. I don't want to have production, staging, or other environments as well. Instead, I will simply provide this name lambda S3 policy. As soon as I remember, I can't use underscores here. So in my case, it is dash that separates the part of the policy name. Okay, let me repeat. Nice. So far, no error. And the lambda creation takes time. Let me pause a bit. It took a few seconds to complete the installation, the providing the Lambda resource, and now I can go to the Terraform, no, to AWS and search for the Lambda. What I have here is a dashboard. I don't need the dashboard. I'll go directly to the functions. There is no data to display because the region is wrong. I'm not sure why I see this region. Yes, now I'm in the domestic region. I have this Lambda, and the Lambda does not have triggers. Neither does it, why she, does it have output. I will need triggers later on, and the trigger will be API gateway. But for now, I can test Lambda and expect my test to fail. How do I provide the data for the Lambda to test it? It's probably JSON, but the JSON of specific format, including the body, and the body should be a string. And for this body string, I will check my test in the Lambda Python module. This format is simple. All I need is this requested operation in the body, and the requested operation is actually quiz topics. It's in the body. But I should escape all the quotes. All the quotes, but the surrounding. Quiz topics. That's it, I don't have to provide the payload. because the payload is optional for some of the requests, for this very request at least. And now I'm gonna check if it works. Of course it should fail. It failed, but not in the way I expected it to fail. I'm missing this SRC module. I don't have SRC in my Lambda function definition. No. If I go to the Lambda function or to any Python module I have in the project, there is SRC. And I know why it happens. It happens because I didn't tell the IDE that my default root source code model is SRC. I'm gonna change it and I'm gonna say that this SRC model contains sources, mark directory as sources root, and now I don't need this specification here. Also, if I start updating my project settings directly on the project pane, I would mark this venv directory as hidden, mark directory as excluded, because I don't want my search trying to find something in this directory when I do full text search. Neither do I want it in this lambda rsrc directory. Again, it's excluded. But now I still have these rsrc specifications and I have them everywhere. So I have, let me do full text replace. It's somewhere in the edit, I believe. Find, replace, replace in files. And it's from src dot something. I will replace with just from. Let me check the files. All the files are the files I created. So replace all. Yep. Now I believe we are fine, but I will check it by running this lambda function one more time. And yes, it works. But now I should go and deploy this lambda function again. And I hope that no, I'm missing one step. Now I have to pack lambda again. And when it's done, I will redeploy because my source code hash will be different. This means this resource should be updated. Apply without extra approve. Yes, should work. Yes, it's refreshing the files. Quizless lambda is getting updated. Update in place probably means that the lambda definition is not getting updated, but only the content. Now it's done, and I'm gonna check if it works. If my lambda now at least tries to process the input. Oh, that's a pity, I didn't store this input. I probably should add it somewhere to test the lambda. Requested operation. Oh no, it's part of the body. So body, requested operation is quiz topics. That should be it. Of course, it should be a JSON. Now test it. Now it takes time. Let's see what's happening inside. Okay, quiz manager. This file was really executed. That's super cool. And it says that Lambda now tries to read the files from this path, quiz path. I don't know the value from these logs. I know the value, and the value is var task storage quiz. This is probably the current directory for my Lambda, but I don't have this storage. And that's the result I expected. My test is success, but just in case I don't want to repeat myself typing all this code here, I go back to the README file I created, and for testing the Lambda, I will preserve this code as a shell script. It's not a shell script, it's JSON actually. Okay, my next step is to update the Lambda code. No, it's to update the actually quiz manager code to be able to read from S3. At the same time, I want to preserve the option for the quiz manager to read files from the local storage because I want to sometimes run this code locally, and I don't want to provide my Lambda, not my Lambda function, but my fast API server with S3 resource. Instead, I'll be still relying on the storage folder. So I need an extra resource here in my repository, quiz metadata repository. I want to make this class abstract. This class I will copy and paste as a base, quiz base, oh, okay, quiz base metadata repository, or maybe base quiz. And the base class, it does nothing but raises an not implemented error exception. I don't need the majority of the imports, at least some of the imports here, but I want to subclass my actual quiz metadata repository from this class and rename the class. I have this nice refactoring option of rename, and this would be local quiz metadata repository. But also I want to rename the model. What I need now is S3 quiz metadata repository. So again, I'll start from copying and pasting this model here in my repository folder, but the name is S3. S3 quiz metadata repository. The signature is the same, but the content obviously it's different. I want to preserve this because I'll reuse some of this code. The difference between the local file system and S3 storage is not substantial from the application developer's point of view, so I might be reusing this code. But now I have to probably install more dependencies and I have to read S3. Again, I'm gonna go Google how do I read this, not repository, but how do I read this S3 bucket in Python. So my request will be S3 bucket, read S3 bucket in Python. Okay, I need this bota3 library. And for the bota3, I will list objects This way, first I should create this bucket. Now I believe I will benefit from defining a constructor, and this constructor would actually set up the access to the bucket. I need a bot client to access the bucket, but I also need to know the bucket name. And the bucket name is kind of variable because the bucket name should be unique. And if someone wanna fork my repository, this forked repository should be referencing to the different bucket. And this bucket should go probably from the environment variables. Let's see. The environment variables for my Lambda, I already defined one. This was the Redis host, but I will need an extra variable telling my sources the bucket name. And I would go back to the settings, and in the settings, I will define bucket name, string variable, field. The default value is the same. Uh, Let me check what it is. In my infrastructure as code folder, I have variables, and bucket name with the data is this. Nice. The bucket name, haven't I copied pasted? No. Yes. And I need an extra settings to decide which repository to use, the one that reads the data from the local folder or the one that reads the data from S3. So I'll probably define one more extra variable here. This would be storage type. And the options would be file system or S3. So judging on this variable value, I will decide on the repository I use. But what's important, I can use bucket name here in my S3 quiz metadata repository. I need the certain objects that I import. No, there is no type hint. Oh, I have already this settings file and the settings variable. Great. What I don't have is this bot3 repository, bot3 module library. The problem is I can install it, but eventually I will have this library on the server. And on the server, I don't have to install it. I don't want to add this dependency. So for now, probably I will add this bot3 package. Pip install bot3. But I don't want to store this requirement in my Lambda assume, no, in my Lambda requirements.txt. I might need this dependency to do my local tests against S3 repository. So probably I will add them later to the requirements.txt. But for now, let me skip this step completely. I should definitely import this. Oh, I don't have to install it. No, what's missing? Is it the environment variable that's missing? Let's check. My project is pointing at Python 3.10. Again, let me check if I can reinstall the project environment. The existing one I would use. Yes, that's okay. And I have both of three here. Nice. Cool, I can continue. I will preserve this bucket or I will preserve this client. I don't know, probably I don't need this bucket object. Instead, I will create the client, and only the client I will store here. S3 client. And also I want to store this bucket name. And that's it. Now I can try listing the bucket files and searching for the files JSON that contain the data about the quiz itself. So my read quizzes function would be listing the resources here using the S3 bota client. And now I should check how do I read objects inside my bucket or list objects. No type hint. That said, okay, list bucket. This option might do for me. Not so sure. Let's see. Not so sure about syntax again, but that's probably it. And the bucket, this is my bucket name. And I'll read my objects here. I don't like the mine in the variable name. That belongs to the topic post, but not to my code. Let it be quiz bucket. And now I want to test this code because I'm not sure if it works on the server, and before posting it to the server, I'm gonna test it locally. And I'm gonna create a repository and read the quiz data. Of course, it will fail because I don't provide the credentials, and I have to set up access to my repository, to my S3 bucket. I haven't done it so far. Yes, access key identifier. Now I need an environment file. And the environment file I will provide here, probably right in the root. And I will reuse these keys in the environment file. Let me see how do I provide the environment variables. AWS access key ID and secret access key. Again, I'm not using this very pair of credentials. Mine is a bit different, but this is just for your reference. Say if I want to use this, I have to provide the environment file somewhere, and one of the options for me is to use my running configuration. So here, if I run it, I have this option. In the configuration in PyCharm, I have environment file tab. And if you don't have this tab, you probably do not have it. In the settings, I want to check my plugins. And among the plugins, I have couples. I have couple plugins for the environment file support. I see env file and .env file support. I see both. I'm not sure which one do I need in this case. Probably the first one, env file. But if you don't have this tab, you go here to this project settings to the plugin, you install these plugins, and now you can go and modify this running configuration again, and you will provide the path to environment file. I don't see the file because it's hidden. It names starts with dot, but when I press this icon, I see the file. On macOS, you will use different hotkeys to display the hidden files, probably Command, Shift, and dot. Yes. Now I'm gonna run this configuration one more time. Oh, it works. I see couple objects, and these objects are actually files because everything in the bucket are files, and if you see subdirectories, subfolders, that's only the part of the key. And now I can use this object definition to extract the path to the file, and probably the file is the only thing I need. And yes, I listed the objects. I might skip extra objects if I have here. So except for JSON files, I might eventually have something else in the bucket. I'm not sure yet, but what I do now, I'm gonna read the content of the file. And I wanna get this object data. I'm not so sure what the object is. Let me print this. If it's a dictionary, if it behaves like a dictionary, let me check if inside there is a body. Nope. Let me rerun it. Okay, what I have is the key and the bucket name, and I need an extra call to get this object. And as soon as I remember, this call should be this S3 client. And this will be get object probably. And for the object, I have to provide the bucket and the key. I know the bucket already, it's here. And the key is what I read here. I read the bucket object dot key. And again, I could use this bucket object dot bucket name. This would be the content. And let me print it. No, actually that's not gonna work. Okay, I know what's happening now. And now I'm trying to use the bot3 resource as I would use the bot3 client. That's not gonna work. I was wrong here. Let me rename it S3 resource. And I also need S3 client. And I would use this S3 client here. Let me rerun the code. It says get object only accept keyword arguments. So I want to explore if I have the arguments in the definition, I can go there. Probably because my when folder is hidden. Do I have this bota 3? Yes, definitely I do. S3. Oh, okay. Googling this is an easier way. So let me check. Bota 3 client S3 get object. I see the arguments already. The bucket, capitalize it, and the key. Nice. Should be simple. Now, if it works, yes, it actually does. And I see the response metadata. I was searching for the body. Do I have body in this data? Sorry, body. This is a stream. So I should read the stream probably. Can I stringify the stream? No. Again, that's object description. I should read the stream to the end. How do I read the body? Okay, there is an answer already to my specific question. I can use this stream or I can just read it. Fine. I have the data and I try to parse this data into the corresponding object, and the object is the quiz data. So I would call it quiz JSON, and quiz data, it's a quiz data, is quiz data from JSON, this one. And as in the local file system repository, I want to return this list of quizzes. I will define it in advance, and I will add this quiz here. And finally, return this list. Now, if it works, I can replace the repository and I can complete my function. Fingers crossed. Yes, it works. Actually, I have the list of I believe it's two quiz data records with all the data inside. The parsing was okay. So I can remove all this data, it's not necessary any longer, and I can go with this implementation. Just as little reminder, I have this .env file. I'm using this file with my credentials to test my metadata repository. I'm not sure, maybe I'll reuse this .env file But the most important thing, I should include this .env file in gitignore. Okay, now I should modify my quiz manager. Now the manager class should decide on the specific repository, judging on the settings variable. And the settings variable is bucket underscore name. Where is it? Where it is? My quiz manager class is in the domain. It's here. And I just use the repository, but it would be a bit less simple. So if settings, I don't have settings here, let me import it. If settings and what's inside quiz path, no, storage type equals to S3, then my repository, metadata repository equal to, I already closed the file, this one. Otherwise, metadata repository is a local file one. And I'm using this instance to read the quiz data. Should be fine now, but for the Lambda function, I should provide both these values in the environment variables section. Redis host I don't use so far. I will use it in future. I will use instead these settings keys, probably capitalized, storage type, and bucket name. For the bucket name, I should have copied this default name. And the storage type is definitely S3. Now I'll publish my Lambda one more time. But I almost forgotten to run one extra command, and this extra command is to pack the Lambda. That's simple, pack Lambda sh. Again, it takes a bit of time, but not too much. Let's see if the output is green. Lambda is being modified. Let me pause. Done again, they didn't take too much and I could avoid pausing the video. Now I go back to the Lambda. Just in case, I will refresh the page and I will go to the Lambda test tab. And for the test tab, I have the payload already. This is the payload. Quiz topic request that actually requires only what? Only S3 resource. No Redis is required so far because we haven't provided Redis. And let's test it. Fingers crossed. My hopes are really high, but the result is an error. Access denied. So my list operation failed to list the objects in the bucket, even though I explicitly allowed my Lambda Let me check my Lambda definition. To read objects from the quiz bucket. Let me check if in settings I'm referring to the Quizless bucket data. Yes, that should be it. Quizless bucket data. Ah, I'm wrong here. The naming is not good at all. It should be data, but I should rename this quiz bucket to quiz bucket website. That's why I allowed these both operations. Let me check the operations. I allowed them for their own bucket, get object and list bucket. So let me repeat the deployment. I don't have to repack the Lambda, I just want to deploy. I'm not pausing my video here because my recording will be only couple seconds longer when it was previous time. The Lambda was updated, at least I hope so. I'm gonna go back to this Lambda testing and I'm gonna copy the payload. Where do I have it? Yes, here. And go test. Failure. Again, access denied. Let's explore what we have in the Lambda security section. So my Lambda permissions is this role, and actually I don't have resource-based policy statements. Okay, what's inside the role? Nothing special, no permissions here. Might be I'm missing something in my lambda.tf. I actually have an idea what's happening with my Lambda policy, and this Lambda policy first, the name would be correct, but the problem is not the name. Let me go back here into policies, and yes, there is a Lambda S3 policy. Lambda S3 policy, okay, let's fix it. But before fixing this policy, I should think about my Lambda and the policy association. Let me check one of the manuals. Okay. My question is, how do I assign a Lambda policy, a policy to AWS Lambda with Terraform? I don't need the permission. I have to specify this very policy for the Lambda. Might be my request is not something that's going to help me to specify the policy, and it will be on its own and the Lambda be as well on its own. Probably I need this Lambda policy attachment, and I'll add the attachment here. Terraform Lambda policy, let me say S3 Lambda policy instead. And I need this Lambda function name, Quizless Lambda. No, that's actually the role. Okay. Oh, I hope this work. This will work for me. Is it the role? Yes. But what should be the policy? I believe I need the RN for the policy. And how do I get one? This policy is the resource I need. And this is the actual name of the resource. Oh, this is just policy. Again, a test one. No, let it be lambda S3 policy. A policy enabling S3 for my lambda. But now I need ARN, and I believe that's just ARN. I also believe I could use this outside of quotes. That should be the correct attachment. And the name is attachment. Again, this is the role for the lambda, and this is the policy. And now I'll try to apply this configuration. Again, auto approve. Fingers crossed. I missed the exact command. Lambda is being modified. I don't know why, because I'm not modifying anything specific about the lambda. And this policy already exists. I don't know what's happening, but I will just remove this policy. I experimented a bit. That's probably it. Delete. Okay. Now I'll repeat. For some strange reason, my lambda gets out updated. But also I see that two resources were added. One was changed, and one of these resources is my new policy, most probably. So let's see if my quiz lambda finally has this policy attached. This is something about security. Or maybe it's inside permissions. Yes, finally, I have permissions to read and write from this bucket. And this means policy is attached to the lambda role. I could check it here. Do I have this lambda policy? Yeah, no, it's gone. That's nice. Fine, and let me test this lambda function one more time. I hope it will be the last attempt. With this payload, I'm gonna access the S3 bucket data, and this time it's green. Super fine. And now I have the answer, and the answer contains the body, and the body contains the string. This is our quiz topics that we just read from Amazon S3. And I believe this is enough for this exercise. Next time will be go to let's say the right side to the Elastic Cache Redis, and we'll provide our Lambda with the storage of the quiz state. This would be again a bit tricky because this resource should reside in our virtual private cluster. And our VPC, we are using the default VPC now, won't be accessible for Lambda if we just add this Elastic Cache resource and enable Lambda reading and writing, updating the Elastic Cache, but without binding our Lambda to our VPC, without enabling our VPC for the Lambda, we won't reach this Elastic Cache. So it will require a bit of extra effort. That's why I believe that's enough for today.